plastic casket. The Price exhibit, the Dr. Price exhibit, is a collection of statements made by Parkland Hospital personnel, assembled by Dr. Price, I presume, and presented to the Warren Commission. And here we have somebody, it doesn't say on here who it is, stating that JFK was put into a bronze-colored plastic casket. And to me, that seems to be a very odd thing to say if it's not true. I mean, you can say people make mistakes, and of course they do, but why would anybody even think that the president had been put in a plastic casket? So it seems to be odd that somebody would make such a mistake. But if this thing was all planned, and it was planned that that casket was going to be carried up to the airplane, up these Eastern Airlines stairs, then you might plan for a plastic casket, because a plastic casket would weigh a lot less than a bronze casket, and you might want to make it so that your job is not impossible. And one of the ways to do that might be to plan for a plastic casket. So I think it's interesting that we have somebody saying it was a bronze-colored plastic casket, an odd mistake to make, and considering this was obviously a planned conspiracy, it doesn't seem all that far-fetched to think that it might have been a plastic casket, and it might have been arranged in advance. And here we have Clint Hill describing some damage done to this casket by the Secret Service.
The agents, myself, we took the casket out of the hearse, started to carry it up the rear steps to Air Force One. We got up to the door because the crew chief and the people on Air Force One had removed some of the seats in the rear of the aircraft so we could put the casket in the rear. But what we hadn't planned on was that the casket was slightly too wide to go through the door with the handles on it. So as we get up to the door, we realized the situation, and we ripped and tore until we got the hands loose and were able to get it into the rear of the aircraft and set it down.
So Clint says they just yanked these handles off of the casket. A very difficult thing to do, I think, if it's a bronze casket, but maybe not if it's a plastic one. And this is a November 26, 1963 document from the Treasury Department. I don't know what that first word says. Is acknowledged this date, November 26, 1963, of the following items from Dr. George G. Berkeley. One piece of bronze-colored material inadvertently broken in transit from casket in which body was brought from Dallas. They don't say it's bronze, they say it's a bronze-colored material. And have you ever tried to break bronze? Bronze is very difficult to break, even if you've got a hammer. So I think it's probably a piece of plastic off a plastic casket. This statement about the plastic casket appears in the Warren Commission volumes twice. And in the first instance I have here, volume 21, page 153, you can't see anything at all to indicate whose statement this is. And in the second instance here, volume 17, page 561, there's something written up there, but it's not legible. And this leads me to believe that somebody is trying to hide who made this statement about the plastic casket, because if the name is there, somebody might go ask him, and perhaps they'd rather that didn't happen. But I think this statement comes from Peter Geilish, and I'll go over why I think that. This is from the 6th Floor Museum, and they have this collection, and I guess they call this the Peter Geilish collection. And in it is some papers he had relating to the assassination. And says it's an internal Parkland Hospital memo with handwritten notes from 11/22/1963 by Peter Geilish. I'm not going to talk about the details here, but when you compare the information on this note to the statement in question, then there is no question in my mind that this statement was constructed from these notes. And knowing that, looking at the illegible name up there, it does look like it might be Geilish. It ends in ICH, it looks like. And so since the notes match the statement, I think I have identified the person whose statement this is, and that is Peter Geilish. And in the Price exhibit, we do have a statement identified by Geilish in which he says, "I wrote a brief report on a scrap of paper and carried it to Mr. Price. Mr. Price listened to it and told me to dictate it to one of the secretaries. Mrs. Fay's story took my dictation. When she pulled it out of the typewriter, I remember thinking how short it is for such an important incident in history. I took it back to Mr. Price, who requested 2 or 3 copies." So obviously I think this is a correct identification of whose statement this is. It's Peter Geilish. So this is the original report, or the notes, from which he read when he dictated his statement to the secretary. That's what makes sense. And right above where it says bronze casket, you can see that PLA has been crossed out. So he had plastic or PLA to remind him of what he was meant to call the bronze casket. Now, also you should notice somebody's gone over this in black ink, so it looks like and it doesn't look like it was necessary to go over it in black ink. This might be a way of crossing out PLA even more, as if Peter Geilish himself had decided or had been told that he shouldn't say it was a plastic casket, and perhaps going over the whole thing with black ink was an excuse to cross out PLA a little more. My speculation, of course. So I think probably the O'Neill Funeral Home did bring a genuine bronze casket. I think that fits with the evidence best, but that it was switched at the hospital. And I'll start with this Clint Hill statement. I then received a request from Mr. O'Donnell to obtain a casket immediately so that we could transport the body back to Washington, D.C. as quickly as possible. I contacted the hospital administrator and asked for the name of the nearest mortuary. He said it would be O'Neill Incorporated. I telephoned them and identified myself and requested that they bring the best casket immediately available to the mortuary, to Parkland Memorial Hospital emergency entrance, and deliver it to me. The casket arrived in about 20 minutes at approximately 1:40 p.m. We wheeled it in immediately to the emergency room where the president's body lay. So Clint Hill says they wheeled it in immediately to the president's body. But we have another account of the arrival of the casket from Holcomb. I think she's a nurse. I know her name is Holcomb, and this also comes from the Price document. I recall seeing the casket brought into the area and remember seeing it being wheeled down the hall to the major surgery door. Now, the major surgery door is not the same entrance to the emergency rooms. As you can see here, the major medicine room is circled in red, and where the red dot is, that's the entry to there. And the trauma room, where JFK was, is circled in blue, and the blue dot would be the entrance from the hallway there. So if the nurse thinks that it's being wheeled to the major medicine room, then that would be wheeled past the surgery room. You say they're both in the same direction, depends where you're standing. But if she thought it was being wheeled to the trauma room there, the emergency room where the president was, and I think she would have said that. I think she realized it wasn't being wheeled there, and she said to where it was being wheeled, and that is the major surgery room. Now, also on this diagram is marked a police room, which presumably the police would have access to, right next to the DOA room. Now, if the police have control of this room, then of course they could have a plastic casket in that room, and they could be prepared to switch it with the bronze casket in the major surgery room. On this diagram, I think it comes from the Posner book, but whether it comes from the Posner book or not, it comes from a later source than this original here, from the Price exhibit, which of course comes from 1963 and 1964. Now this diagram doesn't show an opening or doorway there either, that is between the police room and the Dr. Call room, which has access to the hall to the emergency room. Number 1 is where JFK is. This doesn't show an opening there either, but if you look at the line drawn across there, the line on top in the circled red area doesn't go straight down to the bottom line. It looks like there are 2 lines drawn there, and that they weren't drawn as one. So I think perhaps this document has been adjusted to make it seem as though there is not an entryway on that side of the police room. But if there is an entryway on that side of the police room, then the plastic casket could be sitting already waiting for the president in the police room before the president is shot, and then it can be wheeled down to emergency room number 1 when it's needed. Or it could be wheeled to the major medicine room and switched with the bronze casket there. Either way would work. And the way the evidence appears, it looks as though the caskets could have either been switched before the president had been put into a casket, or they could have been switched after he had been put into one casket, as everybody leaves the room except for Jackie, and they aren't even allowed to stand in the area during this time. So assuming Jackie is in on the plot, and of course she was, they could have switched it after they had put him into a bronze casket. Either way, the plastic casket could have been used. And here we have a nurse saying that the police made everyone leave the waiting room except the patients. I think it was about 4 patients in there. One policeman told me to put them all in a corner, so I asked 3 of them to move to the corner where they couldn't see anything. And this is before they bring the casket out. The other patient was in a wheelchair, and I pushed her into the corner too. I explained to them that after everything was over, they could then go back and receive treatments. One patient wanted to know why they were trying to keep everybody from looking and going into the emergency room, because the president was dead now. I explained that Mrs. Kennedy was not dead, and it was probably for her safety. So it seems like the Secret Service doesn't want people to see the casket coming out. And here this fella is told by the Secret Service to make sure there's nobody near the hearse when the casket is brought out, and make sure the back door of the hearse is open, and to make sure all the curtains are drawn so that nobody can see that casket. And we can see in this photograph the casket is being moved to the back door of the hearse, and policemen are standing in the way, and the photographers are at a safe distance. And we can see here on the way to Love Field, the curtains indeed have been drawn. And in this 1966 DOD document, we are told what happened to the casket. This memo is to advise concerning the disposition of the casket used to transport the body of President John F. Kennedy from Dallas, Texas to Washington, D.C. on the day of the assassination. As instructed, the casket was disposed of at sea in a quiet, sure, and dignified manner by an airdrop into approximately 1,500 fathoms, 9,000 feet of water, at 38 degrees 30-something north, latitude 72 degrees 6-something west, longitude at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday, February 18th, 1966. So this casket was flown out over the ocean and dumped, and they drilled holes in it and put bags of sand in it to make sure it went down and stayed down. So I think they planned for a plastic casket, and they made sure nobody except one guy apparently found out they used a plastic casket. And then a couple years later, 3 years later, 2 years later, They dumped it in the ocean and made sure it went down now 9,000 feet so that nobody would ever see it again.